They laughed when I dropped out of Norwalk Military Academy, said I couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't take the yelling, couldn't face the truth. My sister, Alina, the family's shining gem, was their endless pride. They called her born for the badge. And me, I was the shadow, the whisper over dinner, the quiet glance when relatives asked, "Where's the older one again?" My mother once said, "You're the kind of person who should pick a simple job, far away from places that demand courage." I nodded as if I agreed, but something inside me died that day. No one knew I left home that night, and no one cared. They thought I was running from failure, but the truth? I was walking into a world they could never imagine. I enlisted through a covert contract. They wiped my name from every academy, every system. From that moment on, I became a shadow serving the nation. No medals, no parades, no face to remember. For years, I existed in the dirtiest campaigns, the kind where right and wrong don't exist, where I let my conscience bleed in silence so someone else could live instead of me. Then, one day, I was assigned to observe a new recruit training. I stood on the training ground with five-star insignia tucked in my pocket, moving past the guest seats like a ghost finally allowed to take form. And there she was, Alina, my sister, commanding a squad of fresh soldiers. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was no one, until the head instructor, Sergeant Durand, stepped forward, pale as chalk. He snapped into a salute and said loud and clear, "Major General Hale, ma'am." Silence fell like a curtain, and I heard it. The sound of a practice rifle dropping from my sister's hand, like a bell ringing through the bones of a forgotten past. Alina stood frozen, not out of shock, but because for the first time she had to look at me, not as the sister she once dismissed, but as something she never dared to ask about. No one knew how long I had served, how many times I left and came back under false names, with dried blood on my hands and nightmares screaming in my sleep. But in that heavy silence, I didn't need them to know everything. I just needed to be seen for the first time after all those years, not as a shadow in someone else's home, but as a human being, saluted at the rank I had earned, even if it lasted just one moment, even if it was just one salute in the dust of a training yard. Before I share the rest of my story, I want to know, are you here with me? If you are, leave a comment that says listening or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has reached. Sometimes just one small connection can help a story be heard. And if any part of this story stirred something in you, please consider subscribing, because every listener matters more than you know. Thank you. And now, here is my story. The message came at 6:02 p.m. No punctuation, no warmth. "Party tomorrow night. Be there. Don't dress weird." From my mother. Not "How have you been?" Not "We miss you." Just a command, cold, sharp, as if I were a stranger summoned to a gathering for a family I no longer belonged to. I set the phone down. The screen stayed lit for a few seconds before fading. I didn't move, just sat in that tiny hotel room, watching the street lights bleed through the curtain. I used to hope, years ago, that if I stayed silent long enough, tried hard enough, they'd one day ask where I had gone. But it turns out, my absence just made the air feel lighter. I drove through the night back to Spokane, cold wind slapping the windshield, street lights trailing behind like forgotten memories. The old house emerged like a photo with frayed edges, weathered roof tiles, the mailbox tilting left, like my mother's chin when she disapproves. The wooden door was still the same, heavy, slow, and quiet when I pushed it open. I didn't expect anyone to rush and hug me, but I didn't expect no one to even look up. In the dining room, the smell of cold cuts and waffles hung in the air, sweet in that artificial kind of way. On the wall, a glossy banner read, "Congratulations, Lieutenant Adelyn Hale." I stood there. No one paused their conversation. No one said, "Oh, you're home." My sister, Alina, sat at the center of the table. New uniform crisp, hair tied high, eyes sharp with confidence. She smiled as if everything here belonged to her. And maybe it did. The attention, the compliments, the seat at the center. I wore a plain gray shirt, no rank, no insignia, nothing for them to fake surprise over. My father glanced at me, then said curtly, "So, what are you doing these days?" I didn't even get a chance to answer. He turned to the guest beside him, voice rising. Alina just received the top evaluation in her entire strategic training class. The instructor gave her a standing ovation. I nodded lightly, like an outsider already used to this script. Aunt Kendra, Mom's cousin, took a sip of wine, eyes twinkling with that half-mocking, half-pity look. Belle used to play Army when she was little, remember? And now look at her. Ended up doing some desk job, right? I smiled, not forced, but not real either. "I've gotten better at acting," I said. She laughed, thinking she had won some small duel. As the celebration began, one toast after another rose in honor of Alina. My name was never mentioned. No one even asked if I'd eaten. My mother passed by, resting her hand on my shoulder like she was dusting off an unused chair. "Go grab some more water and a few plates, will you?" I stood without a word, just like all the other times. When I washed dishes after dinners, I was never invited to sit at. In the kitchen, I poured water like someone who'd never held a rifle. My movements smooth, like muscle memory from training. I gathered the plates, came back out. No one noticed. No one asked. I looked around. Every seat had a name card. None for me. My mother looked up, a flicker of realization crossing her face, then vanishing just as quickly. "Oh, you can sit out on the porch. There's a folding chair there." So I sat, next to the propane tank, on a chair cold as an unawarded medal. Through the window, I watched Alina laugh. For a brief moment, her gaze met mine. Just for a second. No hatred, no pity, just uncertainty. She didn't know how to see me. She only knew how to live in a world where I had long been erased. My phone buzzed softly, a secure device no bigger than a USB stick, tucked in my chest pocket. "Report to Fort Irwin. Observation, council level clearance." I smiled. A real one. No one in that house knew I had just been given a strategic redeployment. No one knew who I really was. I stood, left the glass of water on the side table, and walked out the door like a passing breeze. No one said my name. No one walked me out. And that didn't hurt anymore. Because I've lived long enough to understand. If there's no seat for you at the table, you stand. Even if it's just to walk away from the party you were supposed to be welcomed at. I left the house just 30 minutes after receiving the order. No goodbyes. No one even noticed I was gone. My mother was busy adjusting the ribbon on a centerpiece. My father retelling the story of how Alina crushed the strategic aptitude test. And Alina, maybe she knew I'd left, but she didn't say a word. Old habit. Silence is easier. I drove 10 hours through the night toward Fort Claiborne. The highway was cold and black as ink. Each time my tires touched the reflective lane markers, I felt like I was crossing between two worlds. One, where I was a ghost no one in my family dared to name, and the other, where one wrong step could cost you the right to ever be human again. I remember that day clearly, the day I signed myself off the map. It sounds strange, but erasing someone from a national database isn't as hard as people think. All it takes is a strong enough political excuse, a cold enough commanding officer's signature, and a soldier desperate enough to agree to disappear. I was the third. 3 weeks after vanishing from home, I stood in a windowless room, signing a document stamped in red, Shadow Personnel Classification, Level Zulu. The line beneath read, Subject voluntarily agrees to be reassigned under operational anonymity. All former educational and civilian affiliations to be permanently redacted. I signed my name in one stroke. No hesitation. At that moment, the name Hale was still listed in the West Point Reservist database. A week later, it was gone. No one looked for me. No one called. People often think disappearing is an extreme act. But for me, disappearing wasn't death. It was the only survival option left. I didn't run away. I simply stepped into the underground layer of the world, the place where no one cares who you are, as long as you can get the job done. My first superior didn't know I once studied at Norwalk. He didn't need to. He just needed to know I could keep my word, didn't flinch when making hard decisions, and never betrayed anyone, not even myself. I learned to work with things that had no names, networks, back channels, couriers, false codes. I learned to erase trails, build covers, kill rumors before they could breathe. And I learned something no textbook ever taught. Silence, when used right, is a weapon. Once, during an operation near the southern border, a young officer asked me, "Who are you? Where'd you come from?" I looked at him and smiled, as if I wasn't sure myself. In the dark, identity doesn't matter. Only results do. Years later, when I was first saluted as a general, someone asked me, "Did you ever wish to be recognized?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. I never wished for recognition. I only ever wished to be seen, not under stage lights, but in the eyes of the people I called family. Just one look, even once, that told me I was enough. But they never looked, not once. My father used to say, "Not everyone is meant to serve this country." My mother told me, "You're not the kind of person who can handle blood and responsibility." And Alina, she said nothing. And that silence, more than any harsh word, was what pushed me away for good. I remember one night in Tashkent, my 4th year as a Zulu class operative, sitting by a window waiting for a decoding signal. It was snowing outside, and all I had in my heart was one question I didn't dare answer. If I died tomorrow, would anyone back home even know to claim my body? There is nothing more bitter than learning to be strong, just to protect people who never wanted to protect you. But I don't blame them anymore. I don't blame anyone, because the truth is, I didn't vanish. I simply moved into a part of the world they never wanted to know about, and maybe never deserved to. Chapter 3: The Salute That Shook Everything. Fort Irwin greeted me with scorching sun and swirling dust. I arrived 2 hours ahead of orders, a habit rooted in years of Zulu service. No one knew I would be there that day. No one was notified, and that was always part of the plan. I drove to the West Auxiliary Gate, handed the security officer a clearance badge with no rank. He scanned the encrypted code, no questions, no words, then nodded me through. I entered the base like a silent figure slipping between shadows. The main training field was mid-session with a fresh wave of recruits. Dust kicked into the air. Boots stomped the ground in rhythm, firm and heavy like stone. I stood behind the observation seats, a small uncovered area, just a few scattered plastic chairs. Most were empty. I sat in the third chair, second row, between a civilian engineer and a logistics admin. I didn't need to be recognized. I just needed to be present. Out on the field, a female voice rang out with fierce command. Straight lines, eyes forward. There is no room for vagueness in protocol. I knew that voice before I saw the face. Alina, still sharp, still confident, nearly to the point of arrogance. Still the sister who once told me, "You couldn't handle the training, that's why you quit." And now there she stood, leading a squad on the field, completely unaware that just 15 meters away was the very person she once branded a failure. Sergeant Duran, the supervising officer, paced the formation like a seasoned wolf, sniffing out mistakes. I knew him. His reputation alone made even majors hold their breath. He stopped mid-field, scanned the crowd. Then his eyes found me. 1 second, eye contact. And I knew he recognized me, because he was one of only 3 people present at the classified meeting when I was promoted to general. His face stiffened, his shoulders pulled back. He turned, marched directly toward me. Each step seemed to hammer the ground beneath him. I stayed seated, didn't blink. Dust swept through my hair. The wind stung my cheek. Duran stopped exactly 2 steps from me. He stood at attention, arms tight at his sides. Then, in a voice sharp and clear as a gunshot, "Salute to Major General Hale, ma'am." The entire training yard went still. No movement. Even the wind seemed to halt. Boots froze mid-step. A leaf hung in the air as if suspended in time. Alina turned. Her face registered surprise. Then she dropped her training rifle. The metallic clang against the dry ground rang out like a wind chime in a graveyard. Her eyes met mine, no longer looking down on me, no longer dodging the gaze, but stunned, unsettled, and afraid. A recruit nearby whispered, "What just happened, Major General?" Another muttered, "Wait, Lieutenant Alina's sister is a general?" I stood. Duran took 1 step back and gave a respectful nod. I didn't walk toward the formation. No need. I spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "I'm here under directive. Off record. Maintain silence, Sergeant." He nodded, then turned away, offering no explanation to anyone, not even the commanding officers observing from down the line. The formation resumed, but the atmosphere had already cracked. Like a still lake struck by a stone, it may appear calm again, but the ripples linger beneath the surface. Eyes around the training ground began to shift quietly in my direction. No one dared to ask, but everyone speculated. Someone who could make Sergeant Duran stand at attention and salute in front of everyone. That couldn't be just anyone. I quietly stepped away from the observation row, walked toward the west gate. No one stopped me. No one had the authority to. Back in my vehicle, I sat still. Dust from the field still clung to my hands. I thought about the look in Alina's eyes. The contempt was gone. What remained was a shatter. Years ago, at a family dinner, she once said, "You'll never understand discipline. You're only good at leaving." And now she had stood in uniform, weapon dropped from her hand, looking at me like she was trying to untangle truth from the lies our family had stuffed into her head for years. And that was the moment I knew I wasn't a shadow anymore. Not because of the title Major General, but because, for the first time, I had brought an entire military base to silence. That night, Fort Irwin fell into a hush. Desert wind scratched across the barracks like whispers unfinished. Lights went out earlier than usual, not because of orders, but because no one wanted to talk about what happened that morning. Someone had been saluted by Sergeant Durand, someone they all thought had long since left the service. Someone once branded a failure was now a general. Alina sat on her bunk. She had cleaned her training rifle twice, though it wasn't dirty. Her roommate was already asleep, breathing soft and steady. But Alina couldn't close her eyes. Her mind was a storm. Memories, doubts, and shame tangling together like barbed wire. She reached under her bed, pulling out a faded fabric bag. That bag was mine. I gave it to her a year ago during a silent visit to the base. No explanations. I simply placed it down and said, "I don't use this anymore. Take what you need." Alina had never opened it. Maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she was afraid of what was inside, afraid it might make her rethink everything. But now was different. Her hands trembled slightly as she unzipped the bag. Inside were a few old items, a blank notebook, a pair of worn tactical gloves, and a small object the size of a USB, silver casing, no label, no markings. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers. It wasn't standard issue. It was built to be unnoticed. She plugged it into her military tablet. The screen blinked once, then displayed a line of white text on a black background. Restricted, Shadow It Protocol, Level Obsidian. Alina frowned. She had never seen this system before. Even in her cybersecurity training, the name Shadow It had never come up. She tried entering her access code. The system paused a beat, then flickered. Temporary clearance accepted. Viewing mode only. A red frame pulsed around the screen. A low beep echoed. And then everything vanished. At that very moment, in a sealed room deep within Fort Irwin's classified sector, a dormant defense protocol, long believed to be buried, came online. A red alert flashed across the strategic monitoring screen. Unauthorized access detected origin, internal node, profile tag, HX Alpha Shadow It, status, reinitialized. In my room, a secondary encryption module blinked red. I was typing a preliminary report when the alert sound hit, small but sharp as a needle prick. I stood up instantly. Only one person had ever been assigned the HX Alpha tag, me. And that tag had been retired 3 years ago, permanently sealed. Only one device still carried a temporary backup of that code, inside the old bag, the one I had given Alina. I flipped my phone to emergency mode, entered the crisis override code. The screen flashed in red. Protocol Obsidian triggered. Shadow It buffer online. I could barely breathe because I knew exactly what that meant. Shadowit wasn't a program, it was a Cold War-era defense mechanism buried deep inside military contingency systems, designed to preserve top-secret data even if central servers were destroyed. It was built to never activate unless there was a breach, and Alina had just triggered it. I didn't blame her. I couldn't. I was the one who gave her that gift, without a warning, without a note. I thought she'd forget it, thought she'd never open it, thought the bag would remain just an innocent keepsake, collecting silence in the space between two distant sisters. I was wrong. I opened the secondary encryption device, traced the data stream. The signal had just brushed the Shadowit system's buffer, and in doing so, it had activated the hidden circuit, Obsidian. If I didn't contain it in time, old data from the legacy network could resurface, and if someone was watching, my trail would be exposed, not just mine, but everyone who had ever worked with me. I remembered something. During a deployment in Eastern Europe, I had added a temporary access script to the device, an unfinished unlock code to be used only in desperation. That's what Alina had just unknowingly activated. She didn't know. She couldn't have known. Because how could someone raised on praise, on portraits filled with medals and smiling parents, ever understand the cost of living at the bottom of a lake full of forgotten names? I opened the internal comms line, sent a short message to Central Monitoring. I accept responsibility for the access trace. Containment at base level only. Do not escalate to command channels. Requesting 36 hours. I needed time, not to hide, to protect. She wasn't guilty. She had simply opened a door that was never meant for clean hands. Across the compound, Alina remained frozen before the dark screen. The tablet no longer responded. Only one sentence remained, faint like smoke. Welcome, Adelyn Hale. This is where it begins. Chapter 5, The One Who Seeds Darkness. The morning began with a red blinking light above the door. No alarms, no explanations, just a signal, designed to stop people like me in our tracks. I knew what it was the moment I saw it. Suspension order, immediate effect, all access rights revoked. My encryption cards were deactivated. I, Major General Hale, was flagged as a Tier 1 internal threat. No one asked if I did it. No one asked if I knew I was being traced. Because in this system, emotions aren't part of the protocol. I left the coordination wing through a side exit, two security officers behind me. No handcuffs, no words. But none were needed. We didn't walk fast. At Fort Irwin, silence is the language of serious incidents. And today, I was the incident. I was brought to an investigation waiting room. No cell, no interrogation, just a cold steel chair and a blank white screen. Empty, as if someone was preparing to erase me from history. Again, I sat there for nearly an hour, one thought repeating over and over. Who's bold enough to reach into my past? Not just reach, but use it against me. Weaponize what I once buried. I didn't need long to find the name in my mind. Nathan Croft. I met him during a strategic response unit rotation near the Eastern European border, winter of 2018. Croft was praised as a leader without emotion, but the truth was, he didn't even know what emotion was. Cold, calculated, ruthless. A man who would order the destruction of an entire village on the mere rumor of a single embedded spy. I once stopped him. I broke the chain of command to challenge his attack order. I held a map in my hand, pointed at tiny heat signatures in a civilian zone, and said, "There are children in there. Give us 24 hours to verify." He didn't wait. He gave the order. 17 civilians died. 9 of them were children. 3 days later, I sent a classified report to command in Brussels. Croft was reassigned. No one spoke of it. No one held him accountable. But I knew he never forgot me. 6 months later, he vanished from the military database. No discharge, no resignation, just disappeared. The same way I once did, but with one key difference: I disappeared to serve. He disappeared to take revenge. I knew Shadowit still had fragments of old code that had never been fully scrubbed. I knew because I was the one who wrote them. I also knew if someone skilled enough, angry enough, followed the traces backward, they could find that hidden script and fuse it with my legacy access code. When Alina activated that device that night, she didn't just open a technical portal. She triggered the trap Croft had set years ago. I was summoned to the high-security interrogation room. Inside, Colonel Penn, a representative from Strategic Intelligence, and a legal security specialist. No witness panel, just a wooden table, 3 glasses of water, and a printed document stamped in red. Penn looked at me. No smile. We traced a signal tied to the HX Alpha designation, formerly part of Zulu tier operations. That tag was sealed 3 years ago, but it was just reactivated. I didn't blink. Go on. Simultaneously, the system detected a floating data packet, unstructured, pushed from a civilian-grade device. Metadata analysis shows encryption patterns, matching Croft's design. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. It was him. Why does he have this code, Hale? Because I opposed him, and he's the kind of man who never lets anyone walk away after ruining his plans. So you believe he embedded the code into the system beforehand? I don't believe, I know, and I can prove it. I pulled a printed sheet of data from my pocket, an echo trace I extracted from Fort Irwin Systems just before my suspension. On it was the initialization command chain, not from my device, but from an internal IP address located outside the coordination zone. An unfamiliar device, a civilian advisor account registered under a false name. That alias, when cross-referenced through birth date and personnel ID, led straight to Nathan Croft. No one said a word for 10 seconds. They didn't have to. The evidence was right there. Croft was back. He had hidden behind the role of a consultant, waiting for the right moment to turn me into a traitor in the eyes of the system. Colonel Penn leaned back in his chair. If that's true, you just saved your own reputation. I nodded. I'm not here for reputation. I want justice, not for me, but for the names he erased and for those who'll be next if we don't stop him now. I left the room not feeling relieved because I knew this was only the first move. Croft hadn't shown himself. He'd only sent a digital message. I'm still here and I can still make you disappear. But he was wrong about one thing. I had disappeared, and I came back. This time, I won't stay silent. I could have handed Alina over to the disciplinary board. Just one report, one signature, and she would have been interrogated, like I was, branded a digital threat for nothing more than a mistimed touch. But I didn't. I went to see her after the tribunal. She was sitting alone in the old auxiliary data room, a space no one had used since the system overhaul. I didn't knock. I stood in the doorway and said quietly, "If you want to step away, now's the time." She looked up. Her face still carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights, but in her eyes, there was no panic. There was something I hadn't seen in years: remorse and resolve. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. I nodded, and for the first time since I disappeared, my sister and I stood on the same side. We started with the data fragment Alina had accidentally activated, the dormant code hidden in the old device I left behind. When magnifying the code structure, I noticed a strange repetition, a kind of layered lock. "Croft planted a trap," I explained. "He embedded it in the backup network 5 years ago, a dead code, one that wouldn't activate unless someone accidentally opened it." Alina lowered her head. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't break anything. You were just the final piece in a chain of missteps he planned. The problem wasn't that you touched it. The problem is that no one stopped him 5 years ago." We traced the history of the code, each recorded call, every unpatched encryption anomaly in the secondary system. And there, hidden beneath a layer of SHA-2 security, was a tag: NCRH75, Nathan Croft, Red Hawk, Operation Code 275. I remembered it clearly. It was his final operational ID before he disappeared. Croft didn't want me dead, not literally. He wanted me erased. No one eliminates a person more effectively than by making them appear treasonous. He didn't need to shoot. Just let me rot under the suspicion of my own people. And he almost succeeded, if not for Alina's accidental touch. 3 days later, we uncovered a hidden log file, unnamed, buried inside a subdirectory of the Delta 9 backup server, a site sealed since the Eastern European incident. The log showed Croft had accessed the backup system under civilian analysis oversight, which meant someone of extremely high rank had granted him clearance. I said nothing to Alina. I just stored the file in a secured drive. This game wasn't over. While I handled the primary investigations, Alina volunteered to comb through Fort Irwin's internal monitoring system. She spent entire days in that room, surrounded by dry logs, lines of looping code, commands that blurred into meaninglessness. I didn't stop her, because I understood. Sometimes guilt needs a job, so it doesn't swallow us whole. One night, when I returned to my quarters, I found a folded scrap of paper on my desk. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "You don't have to forgive me, but I need you to know. I used to think you gave up. Now I understand. You were the only one who wasn't allowed to fall." Alina. I sat down, placed the note over my heart, and for the first time in years, I exhaled like someone who just swum up from the deep. The next morning, we were summoned to a strategic operations briefing. For the first time, Alina sat beside me, not as a subordinate, but as someone who had survived on the same battlefield. Together, we laid out the evidence: the code Croft left behind, the falsified access credentials, the logical attack structure indicating this was a reverse infiltration, and most critically, a manipulated voice print, my voice, used to issue a system command a week earlier. The room was silent. Then an aging security officer, eyes red-rimmed, finally spoke. "If not for you, who else would hold the line?" I didn't respond, because I never fought for gratitude. I fought so someone else wouldn't have to carry the silence I once did. After the meeting, Alina walked beside me down the corridor. She said nothing at first, just walked. Then suddenly, if I hadn't opened that device, would you have ever told me everything? I stopped, looked her in the eyes, and told the truth. No, I didn't think you'd want to hear it. She nodded, not angry, not sad, just a faint smile, like someone who had finally learned that love doesn't require sameness. No one said it outright, but every look in the room had spoken. I, Major General Hale, had my system access reinstated, but trust was not restored. Even with every piece of evidence pointing to Croft, even with the code exposed and the trap unraveled, the word traitor still lingered like static in the air, an invisible stain on a uniform, unseen, but felt by all. The Strategic Military Council convened an emergency session. Agenda: Level 6 security breach, war simulation system compromise. I walked into a room flooded with cold white light. Faces from Europe, the Far East, North America, all present via encrypted feeds. No one greeted me. I was used to that. As I began my report, a voice cut in from the end of the table. Before you proceed, General Hale, are you aware that you're still listed as an internal monitoring subject? I nodded. I am, but I also know I didn't trigger that code. I didn't have the device. I wasn't there. I didn't start this. A pause. I glanced to my right. Alina sat there, staring down at her hands. She knew, I knew, and they, if they had any fairness, should know too. Then Alina stood up, quietly. No fanfare. No one called her name, but no one stopped her either. I'm the one who opened the file, Alina said. It wasn't intentional, but I did it. I didn't verify the device, didn't scan the code layers. I'm the one who triggered the Shadowit protocol. No one reacted fast enough. An older lieutenant general leaned forward slightly. Lieutenant Alina, do you understand the severity of your actions? I do, she replied. I know I could lose my rank, be suspended, even face further investigation. But I can't let my sister keep carrying the consequences for something I did. I looked at her, not as the hardened officer who barked orders on a training field, but as the 10-year-old who used to hide behind a door while I was scolded unfairly. The girl who once believed I quit out of weakness, the one who never really heard me. And now, in the most powerful room of the military system, she finally raised her voice. A council member spoke slowly. We acknowledge the statement. A review board will examine the matter in detail. However, given this new data, responsibility will be reassessed. The session recessed for 10 minutes. I stepped into the hallway, the air dry, metallic, familiar. Alina followed a few paces behind. I turned to her. Why? I asked softly. She looked at me, voice trembling but steady. Because I used to think you were the reason I felt ashamed. But it turns out I was just silent for too long. I didn't answer, just stood there, letting the silence pass between two people who were once blood, then strangers, and now maybe sisters again. Meanwhile, in another data node on the military network, a shadow began to move. Croft. He didn't care what we had just survived, didn't care who had stepped forward, who had stayed silent, who had finally spoken the truth. Because for him, victory wasn't in trials or truth. It lived inside the automated war simulation system, a system he had just breached. Zulu-level coordination received an alert. 7 war simulations activated simultaneously. each containing unauthorized command code. AI response data being altered in real time. Croft didn't need to attack the military. He only needed to let the system attack itself. Based on false data he fed it. If we didn't stop it, a simulation could be mistaken for a real command. And from there, just one misstep, and war could ignite over a technical error. I returned to the war room. Before me were the very people who once doubted me, now staring at the screen as if seeing a ghost. Croft didn't just want to erase me, I said. He wants to use our own system to destroy us. Where is he now? Someone asked. Unknown, but he's operating under an access credential belonging to someone declared dead 3 years ago. An aging general whispered, horrified. God, he never really disappeared. I glanced at Alina. We don't have much time. You need to return to the encryption center. You understand the Shadowit framework better than anyone. And you? She asked. I'm going to the only place where Croft can still be traced from the deepest tier of the system. Where? The original data vault, the place where they once erased my name. Now, I'll restore it myself. Fort Irwin Base, 0426 a.m. I sat alone in an auxiliary data room, abandoned since the system upgrade 3 years ago. The lights lit only half the space. The musty smell of old cables and dead cooling vents hung in the air like memories that refused to sleep. On the table lay the encryption drive I once used in Eastern Europe. It wasn't networked, never updated. Technically, it wasn't even authorized to exist anymore. But I had kept it, out of an old habit, because people like me know better than to erase something just because it's inconvenient. Alina appeared behind me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Are you sure? No, I said, but if we don't do this, he'll keep turning people like me into shadows. I opened the hard drive, began crafting a code segment, a mirrored version of the old Shadowit structure, but this time I embedded a false feedback layer, a decoy data string, a code that would suggest I had accessed a backup system from an old relay station, just 20 minutes from Fort Irwin. If Croft was watching, he'd believe I was trying to restore Shadowit from its old root network, something no control-obsessed operative could ignore. He won't be able to resist, I whispered. I know how he thinks, because I used to be like him. Except for one thing, I chose not to stay silent. I activated the code at 05:00 a.m. Within 14 minutes, the decoy relay station received 3 access pings. On the 4th, an IP blinked to life, anonymous but flawed. He used an outdated relay tool, the kind that only came pre-installed on Delta-class terminals. And there was only one place left that still had those machines, B-12 Sub-Level Bunker, a site marked decommissioned near Fort Irwin. 06:22 a.m. Emergency response directive issued. A joint special ops unit was mobilized within the hour. I wasn't part of the raid, not because I didn't want to be, but because this time I needed to stand elsewhere. I stood in the command room next to Alina, watching every signal, every breath of movement. 8:03 a.m., audio feed from embedded mic crackled. In position, preparing to breach lower sublevel, temperature rising slightly, signs of life confirmed. Interior lights active. Suspect may be processing data on legacy servers. Orders confirmed. Capture alive. Do not destroy equipment. Alina squeezed my hand. I didn't move. Proceed. The bunker door was breached. A burst of shouting, commands, boots pounding metal. Then, silence. I held my breath. A voice came through. Target secured. Confirmed ID. Nathan Croft. He was captured. Alive. In that moment, I didn't feel joy. Didn't feel victory. Only a dull pulse behind my temple. I requested to be taken to the site, not to look at him, but to face the place where the darkness once called my name. B-12 sublevel bunker was a cold metal box, barely 20 square meters wide. On the table, an old Delta server blinked with lines of half-finished code. A suspended war simulation program still hung on the screen. He hadn't had time to wipe it. Croft sat, hands bound, slumped against the wall, still dressed in his fake technician gear. He saw me and smiled. That kind of smile I'd seen before, from men who believed destruction was a form of art. "Been a while," he said. "I thought you were dead." "And I thought you'd changed. Turns out, you're still the same filth." He shrugged. "You think surviving with a conscience makes you better? You think you're different from me? I don't kill civilians to protect my plans." "No, you just let them die, in silence." My fist clenched. Silence isn't always complicity. Sometimes it's the cost of survival. But today, I choose to speak. He was led away. No resistance, no remorse. Here is the English translation of this chapter, continuing in the same rich cinematic storytelling tone. What remained in the air was only the damp scent of darkness overturned, and a question no one had yet answered. How many other names had he dragged into the whirlwind of erasure? Before I left the bunker, I stopped in front of the server, plugged in a secondary drive, began downloading everything. "What are you doing?" Alina asked. "This isn't just about Croft. There are other names, people who were erased, like me, people who may have never even been called by their real names." The hearing was scheduled on a windy Thursday. The high-security military courthouse sat at the center of Washington, D.C. No press, no flags flapping in the breeze, only thick, cold walls and eyes trained to show no emotion. I stepped into the plenary room at 07:29 a.m., slowly, not with defiance, but not with submission either. I had grown used to this feeling, being seen not as a person, but as a problem. Croft was brought in first, seated across from me. He wore the uniform reserved for high-level military detainees, light gray, stripped of insignia or name. It was as if he, too, was now being erased from the very system he once manipulated. He didn't look at me, but I knew he was still performing. The final act of a man who was once a legend in electronic warfare. The presiding officer tapped the gavel gently. "We now begin the hearing on the allegations against Major General Adelyn Hale concerning unauthorized activation of Shadowit Code and alleged concealment of civilian casualties in Operation Baltic 17. The air turned thick. I could hear the sharp rhythm of a legal aid's boots crossing the floor to deliver documents. "Mr. Croft," the presider continued, "do you affirm that General Hale ordered the strike on a zone containing civilians?" Croft leaned forward, his voice polished, like he was briefing a well-rehearsed operation. "Yes." She deleted the recalibrated targeting map after identifying civilians in the zone. When I advised a delay in fire authorization, she refused. As a result, 34 people died, including children. A soft murmur stirred. A female colonel to the left shook her head. I remained silent, not because I wasn't furious, but because I knew the moment for the counter-strike hadn't come. The presider turned to me. "General Hale, do you have a response to this accusation?" I stood. The overhead light stretched my shadow long across the polished white floor. "I do, and I offer evidence." I gave a small nod toward Alina, seated in the back row. She stepped forward and handed the counsel a secure drive. "This is an audio log from a secondary device embedded in my tactical headset. It was backed up privately due to the irregular nature of Baltic 17. No one else knew this copy existed, except me, and someone who still believed in the truth." The recording began. Croft's voice rang out clearly. "I don't care if there are civilians left. The biosignature scan didn't detect clear heat. Launch the strike." Then came my voice. "I won't issue fire orders without verifying thermal echoes." There's a child crying from the east basement. Croft, trying to control his tone. "You want to delay for a few ambiguous sounds?" And my voice again, now like steel. "I want to protect lives, and I won't let you use ambiguous to justify indiscriminate harm." No one spoke when the recording stopped. Silence fell, so dense it pressed against my lungs. Croft bowed his head, not from guilt, but because he knew the board had flipped. The presider sighed and removed his glasses. "This council declares all charges against Major General Adelyn Hale are hereby dropped, honor restored, command reinstated to the full rank held prior to the incident." I didn't cry. I had cried enough. In bunkers, in field tents, in empty barracks where no one saw. I simply nodded, like someone who had just heard her own name again, after being called a number for years. That day, after the hearing ended, I exited through the rear corridor. No crowd, no headlines. But something unexpected happened. Just as I was about to step into the car, Alina ran up behind me and called out softly, "Wait, just a moment." I turned back. She stood there, dressed in full uniform. Pinned to her chest was a new insignia, awarded that morning after her internal briefing on cybersecurity reform. "I completed the presentation," she said. "The proposal to restructure digital warfare training was based on everything you lived through." "And they listened?" I asked. "Not just listened. They asked me to help rewrite the National Training Manual, and they want you to be the final reviewer." I looked at her, not the girl who once chased recognition, but the woman who had stumbled, owned her mistakes, and chose accountability. "Then," I said, "starting over is a privilege. And not everyone gets that." Dawn. Fort Irwin remained wrapped in silence. Over the mountains to the east, the first light of day spilled across the ridges, turning the mist a soft shade of rose. Gentle, almost unreal. I stood at the secondary gate, the one no military parade ever passed through, no medal ceremony, no cameras, no applause, and that was my choice. A week earlier, the Strategic Military Council had sent me a formal invitation to the National Recognition Ceremony. They wrote, "Major General Hale deserves a day when the entire country remembers her name." I didn't respond right away. I printed the letter, left it on my desk all afternoon, then folded it once, then twice, slipped it into the bottom drawer, the one reserved for things not worth carrying. I didn't decline out of pride, not because I craved anonymity, but because I knew True honor doesn't live on a podium. It lives in every silent choice you made, every life you quietly saved, every order you refused to carry out, every return to the field, even when no one called your name. Alina found me just before I left. She wore combat fatigues, her boots scuffed, backpack slung with the ease of someone who's learned how to walk long distances. No longer the girl chasing medals, now a woman who had grown from her mistakes and learned the value of quiet. "You're really going?" she asked, voice low. I nodded. "I have nothing left to prove, but I still have things to do." She smiled, but something inside that smile trembled. "I've kept this for a long time." She reached into her chest pocket and pulled out a small silver-gray metal case, dented on one corner. I recognized it immediately. The Phoenix insignia, symbol of the intelligence unit I once served. The emblem of those who rose from the fire. Names erased from files, medals unpinned, yet they had stopped wars before they ever started. You left it in the med kit I mistakenly received 5 years ago. I kept it, didn't know why, just felt it wasn't something that should be forgotten. I took the box, gently, carefully, opened it. Inside, the broken-winged phoenix fused together with thin wire. A flood of memory washed over me, not pain, peace. I looked at her, and before I could say anything, she stood tall and raised her hand in a perfect military salute. For the first time, not out of duty, not because it was expected, but out of respect. "Major General Hale," she said. "Ma'am, I salute you." I froze for a breath, not because I was hurt, but because for years I hadn't been waiting for an apology. I had been waiting for someone to truly see me. I returned the salute by the book, then stepped forward, wrapped my arm around her. An embrace, not tight, not loose, just enough, like two shadows that had wandered separately and finally found each other again. No more words were needed, no tears, no apologies, only silence. But this time, silence wasn't abandonment, it was recognition. As I turned toward the vehicle, Alina called softly, "Hey, wait." I turned back. "If someday someone asks me about you," she said, "I won't say you were a general. I'll say, you were someone who did what was right when no one else dared to, and that is what matters most." I smiled. I didn't need my name carved in stone, didn't need medals on my chest, didn't need a stage to be celebrated. I just needed to be myself. No surprise, no tears, no dramatic hugs like the ones people dream about in movies. She just looked at me for a moment. Then, in a voice softer than I remembered, "Have you had dinner yet?" I said nothing, just nodded, and stepped inside. The living room was still that same worn-out shade of brown. The sofa where Dad used to read the paper had frayed arms. The wall clock still ran 2 minutes slow. But one thing had changed. On the wooden shelf by the stairs, the one that always held Alina's graduation photo, Aunt Ruth's wedding picture, Dad's awards, there was a new frame. It was me, in uniform. My face wasn't clear, but anyone could tell it was me. The photo sat there, like a memory they no longer tried to hide. Dinner was simple, no celebration, no flowers, no one mentioned medals, just the same old stew I used to hate, the one Mom always made when it got cold. I ate, no complaints, no praise. Mom didn't ask anything, didn't explain anything, but she sat there, across from me, as if her presence was the only apology she knew how to give. Dad walked in later, his hair grayer, his steps slower. He looked at me, longer than most fathers look at a child who's been gone too long. "I don't know where you've been," he said, voice low but firm, "but I know you've come home." I nodded, and that was enough. No one said sorry. No one explained. And I didn't expect them to, because sometimes just being seen again is a quiet kind of forgiveness. That night, I went back to my old room. It was nearly untouched. The old books, the corkboard with faded notes, a torn poster of the high school football team I used to cheer for, and on the desk, a postcard, never sent, no name on it, just one line. "My daughter, I hope you're okay." The handwriting was shaky, trembling. I held it, pressed it to my chest, and let the tears fall quietly onto the edge of the card. I didn't need them to rewrite the past. I didn't need public apologies. I just needed to know, even if it came late, that this house finally had a space where I belonged, and that was enough. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, thank you, not just for listening, but for being present, for a life once forgotten. If any part of Hale's journey touched something in you, leave a comment. It can be a full reflection or just one word. I'm here. And if you want to walk with us through more untold stories, hit subscribe, because every follower is a quiet reminder that people like Hale deserve to be remembered.